I'm very excited to welcome you all to today's Wetlands Institute Speaker Series webinar. Today we're joined by Jess, Martina, and Lori, who will be sharing information on Whirling disease, exploring its effects on aquatic ecosystems, and the collaborative efforts needed to prevent its spread. This is our final webinar as part of the Wetlands Institute Speaker Series, where we've learned about controlling reed canary grass, wetlands as fast-acting climate solutions, and wildfire risk in wetlands. And if you missed these, the recordings can be found on our YouTube channel. My name is Alana Higginson, and I'm the coordinator for the BC Wildlife Federation's Wetlands Education Program. My colleague Erica is also on the call today, just helping out with some back-end tech support and sharing some links in the chat. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we have people joining us from across what is known as British Columbia, who are all on their own personal reconciliation journeys. I'd like to humbly acknowledge and show respect to the Indigenous peoples who since time immemorial and to this day have lived in relation with and stewarded these lands that we're all privileged enough to call home. Through watershed restoration, conservation, and education, the BC Wildlife Federation has had the opportunity to work with First Nations across the province. We're incredibly grateful to the elders, knowledge holders, guardians, technicians, and all of those who have shared their knowledge with us. And we look forward to continuing to build and grow our relations. I'm currently calling in from Creston, which is the unceded, ancestral, traditional, and contemporary territories of the Yakanuki and the Ktunaxa Nations. As a nonprofit, the BCWF relies on grant funding, partnerships, memberships, donations, and sponsors. So I'd like to thank our funders for this webinar, Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation and Wildlife Habitat Canada, who have helped make this possible to run at no cost. Just a quick introduction to who we are. The Watershed Team is a department at the BC Wildlife Federation dedicated to protecting, conserving, and restoring water and watersheds across BC for future generations. We're focused on enhancing watershed security using three core elements. Watershed education, where we teach you to steward wetlands and fish habitat in your community. Conservation tools, where we're working on the development of tools to assess, catalog, and enhance the understanding and management of wetlands, and watershed restoration, where we're implementing various techniques to build and restore wetlands and stream habitat throughout the province. If you're interested in learning more about our organization or team, you can find our website and social media accounts with the link that Erica will be sharing in the chat, and you can join our mailing list to stay up to date on any sort of workshops or new information. Just a couple quick notes about Zoom so that you can get the most out of this webinar session. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. Please use this to pose any questions for the presenter, and we'll save time at the end of the presentation for all questions. To help us prioritize these questions, we encourage you to click the thumbs up icon under the questions in the Q&A box, which will upvote them and send them to the top of the list. There is also a chat box, and feel free to use this chat if you want to let us know where you're calling from, share any comments or resources throughout the presentation. And for those who would like them, there's also a closed caption button to turn on subtitles for your device. Last thing before we get started, at the end of the webinar, there will be a quick survey that pops up on your screen. It's only a couple questions, so it should take less than 2 minutes or so. And your feedback really helps us improve our programming and is crucial to support our grant applications and reports. If you could take a few minutes to fill it out quickly, we would be extremely grateful. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce our three speakers for today. We have Jess Booth, who's the Communications and Engagement Coordinator for the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society. Since joining CSIS in 2021, she's worked to raise awareness about invasive species and their impacts across the Columbia and Shuswap regions. Martina Beck is the Freshwater Applied Science and Invasives Unit Head with the BC Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. Martina oversees the Ministry's Science and Strategic Policy Unit for Aquatic Invasive Animals, which includes the shared delivery of the BC Invasive Mussel Defense Program with the BC Conservation Officer Service. And last but not least, we also have Lori Frankham, who has been the Engagement Coordinator for the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society since 2015. She develops, coordinates, and delivers invasive species outreach and awareness activities, programming, and training throughout the RDCK and RDKB areas A and B. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and pass things over to Jess.
Okay, can we see that, everybody?
Looks great.
Awesome. So thanks so much for the introductions and thanks for joining us today. I'm Jess from the Columbia Shuswap Invasive Species Society, and we'll be joined by Martina and Laurie throughout the rest of this presentation. So we are going to be chatting about whirling disease and what can be done to prevent its spread and what you might need to know if you're out recreating on the landscape. So I'll give a brief overview here for what we'll be talking about today. I'll do a brief introduction about who we are, uh, Invasive Species 101 for those that may or may not know already, and then what we're all here for, whirling disease. Martina will provide a provincial update, and Laurie will be sharing some information on what you can do. And as mentioned earlier, we'll have some time for questions as well. So the imager is of some fish affected by whirling disease, and we'll get into that right now. So just briefly on who I am and what the Regional Invasive Species Councils do. So I'm from the Columbia Shuswap Regional Invasive Species Society and work throughout the Columbia Shuswap District. So there are many other groups that work for similar organizations and similar purposes to CSIS. And CICUS, or the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society, is to our border on the south, and they work doing similar work to prevent invasive species being spread across the region. And we have a few different programs, terrestrial and aquatic, as well as the communications pieces as well. And I'll let Martina share here about the ministry and the work they do.
Sure, and just wanted to quickly touch on how we're coordinated across team BC government in terms of coordinating and collaborating our invasive species programs across the provincial government. So we have an interministry invasive species working group, which is focused on providing coordinated, collaborative, and cost-effective delivery of invasive species programs across the provincial government, and listed there. I won't read them all out, but we have members from quite a wide number of ministries in which invasive species intersect their areas of work and programs. And so really want to make sure our efforts are coordinated across the ministries. So taking that cross-ministry approach. And we also have associate members in addition to our ministry membership. So I'll pass it back over to Jess.
Thanks, Martina. So next on our presentation here, I'd like to ask a question, and maybe if you could do some quick answers in the chat. I've got some hints on the screen, but what are invasive species? If anyone's curious of taking a guess or an informed piece of information about what invasive species are, that would be great. But here on the screen, while you're thinking and typing away, we have a red-eared slider. So it's a invasive species in BC. We also have a plant, Himalayan balsam, which is quite prolific across our region. And then we've also got some invasive insects as well. So I can see some comments there suggesting, yeah, it's a red-eared turtle or red-eared slider, which is a turtle, and non-Indigenous to this area. So for sure, we sort of work under the definitions of they are not from here, and we'll stick with just species for this presentation. Animals, plants, insects, and microbes. So they become they are introduced to an area outside of their natural range. They can be introduced purposefully or accidentally, and they establish aggressively, outcompeting native species or habitat and vegetation, and they bring detrimental impacts. So these impacts can be social, environmental, and economic. They threaten agricultural and food production, as well as the environment. They can decrease property values, be expensive to manage and prevent. They can often spread diseases and can also interfere with tourism and recreational opportunities. So on this side here, we've got some characteristics of invasive species. They usually reproduce and grow very quickly. while having little to no predators introduced as well. Often when I share with youth and different audiences, I say we bring the invasive species, but we forget to bring the things that keep them in check. So they can also produce large numbers of seeds or eggs. They disperse far and wide and tolerate a wide range of conditions. So what we're all here for. Disease. What is it? Some of you might be familiar with it, but essentially it is an infectious disease affecting fish in the salmon family, including trout, salmon, and whitefish. Themselves are infected by a microscopic parasite, Myxobolus cerebralis, and this parasite requires two hosts, so the salmonid fish and a freshwater worm, Tubifex tubifex. Apart from swimming in a circle, some characteristics that the fish can be affected by are skeletal deformities on the head, body, or tail. And there's an example here of a healthy rainbow trout in the top, and then down an infected fish, darkening of the tail and a slight sort of curve or bend in it. And both these fish were captured in the Crow's Nest River in Alberta. So just a note here as well that the worm itself is not invasive, just the disease, but the worm itself is very common across species waterways. This here is a snapshot of the provincial brochure, which is great. It has a lot of really good information. Some key pieces to know here that Whirling disease is not a health risk to humans or animals. So whether you were to accidentally eat the fish or drink the water or swim in it where Whirling disease is present, it's not a health risk. Diagnosis requires laboratory testing, and not all infected fin fish show signs of the disease. And not all fish with Whirling disease, not all fish with deformed spines or skulls have Whirling disease either. Currently, there is no treatment available, and payment and prevention options, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation, are the best response. We were going to show a short film or a little video here, which provided a really good insight and an animated response into the life cycle of Whirling disease. It's produced by the Elk River Society, and they did it a few years ago now, so some of the information is outdated, but we'll share that in the chat and then share it at the end of the presentation as well, because it's got some really great info there, and it's only 3 minutes. So disregard that. And I'll now hand over to Martina for a provincial update. Oops, I'll reshare the screen.
Great, thank you. Great, and you can go to the next slide. Just wanted to start off with talking about, I'll just wait for it to get to the next slide, I think, just looking at distribution. So in terms of where Whirling disease has been detected, so it's been detected in 26 US states. The parasite believed to have been introduced from Europe in the late 1950s. Potentially through the movement of culture of fish, so through hatchery systems, moved into North America. And the first detection in Canada occurred in Alberta in 2016. And then, of course, the notable one for us in British Columbia was the first detection in BC occurred in December of 2023 in Yoho National Park. So you can see the arrow there. We've kind of zoomed on different scales from the North American map that shows that certainly we do have our bordering province of Alberta, and then our bordering states, including Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Alaska, where it has been detected. And then on the zoomed in map, you can see the star there showing where Yoho National Park, and it was in Emerald Lake specifically that the first detection occurred in Yoho National Park. And that was confirmed through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. which is the federal agency under which whirling disease is a reportable disease through CFIA. And in terms of Emerald Lake, in terms of its sort of hydrological connectivity, it drains into the Kicking Horse River, which is just right around the Golden area, for those who are familiar with that area, which then the Kicking Horse River drains into the Columbia River and then of course the Columbia River watershed. So that was first detection in BC in 2023. And moving to the next slide. In terms of following that detection, some steps that were taken through by the province and working with partners in terms of response steps. So working closely with Parks Canada, who is leading response within the national parks of Yoho National Park, as well as the adjacent Kootenay National Park. Following those detections, Parks Canada did implement some restricted activity closures to restrict boating activities within Yoho and Kootenay National Parks. They did just announce that they've extended those closures by another year. So working closely with both Parks Canada and CFIA in terms of Parks Canada have been monitoring for it in their parks for a number of years. So working with them in terms of some of their existing surveillance and response work, as well as connecting in with our colleagues from the province of Alberta to learn from their response and lessons learned since it was detected there in 2016. We also developed an internal working group to, I mentioned that cross-ministry collaboration earlier, so specifically for those where it kind of intersects in terms of areas where there may be work happening in and around water and wanting to make sure that we're connecting in with those different program areas. So not only within WRS, but also working with our BC Parks, as well as our Ministry of Transportation and Transit colleagues. In terms of some immediate steps that were taken following that detection in 2023, for the start of the 2024 boating season, through the chief veterinarian, we implemented a new order that was issued, making it a requirement that anyone transporting their boat in BC must have the drain plug removed. And so this applies when moving a boat between any water bodies over land. This is a key element of the clean, drain, dry. So Lori will be speaking to kind of those prevention steps further along. So I won't go into it too much, but really that draining step as part of clean, drain, dry is a really important mechanism to help prevent the spread. So implementing that order and that requirement and having that implemented for last year's boating season. We also worked on having some updated clean, drain, dry signs. You can see that the latest updated version is on the slide there, and working on having those set up at priority boat launches across the province, as well as a new decontamination protocol specific to whirling disease. And having that as a recommendation for any time water equipment or boats are being moved outside of water bodies within the Columbia River watershed, and having that as a requirement for contractors and government staff within the Columbia River watershed. And moving to the next slide. The other component of response was focusing in on surveillance. So for last year, we did focus on surveillance primarily in the Columbia River watershed, just due to that risk of potential downstream spread that I mentioned, that connectivity through from Emerald Lake and Yoho National Park into the Columbia River watershed. So we not only partnered with CFIA and Parks Canada, but also worked closely with local First Nations on sampling within these areas, and working with partners in terms of sampling and testing protocols, and learning from sampling and surveillance done in other jurisdictions. This is building off of where we have been doing sampling for whirling disease in prior years, prior to 2024, but that sampling was largely focused in the kind of southeastern Kootenay part of the province, just in kind of adjacent areas to where there were detections in Alberta. So last year's surveillance was expanding from where surveillance had been done in previous years. And so that was the focus, in addition to kind of having those outreach and education and prevention tools developed, focusing on surveillance. And if we move to the next slide in terms of the results from that surveillance, oh, if we just go back one, I think it skipped a slide. There we go. So this here is a map of the results from our surveillance last year. So the yellow highlighted area shows the reference to Emerald Lake in Yoho National Park, where there was the detection in 2023. And the outlined area there is the Columbia River watershed. And so results did come back with 3 trout samples that were taken from tributaries going into the south arm of Kootenay Lake that did test positive for the presence of the parasite. So just mentioned the Myxopolis cerebalis parasite is, and that was what was detected within those fish samples. It's unknown if there is any connection to the detections in Yoho National Park. It's also unknown if this is a new detection. So these locations were sampled several years prior, either in 2017 or 2018, where there were no positive results. So it's unclear if this is newly detected this year or whether it may have been present in the system for several years. We also don't know what this could mean. We didn't see fish showing clinical signs in this area, or have received kind of reports of that. So we don't know in terms of what it could mean in terms of whether there's actually an infected population versus the presence of the parasite, but not necessarily an infection, because in terms of whether the presence of the parasite and whether you actually have an infected population can be dependent on, as described earlier, whether it's a susceptible species, different environmental conditions, to whether or not that tubifex worm host is suitable habitat for it, and whether it can be present, as well as different environmental conditions like temperature and substrate and things like that. So we did, I should mention too, our sampling was done using a combination of collecting juvenile fish samples, as well as doing some eDNA sampling as well. So the eDNA is a bit of an emerging tool for use in terms of detection for whirling disease. So we've been working with the University of Alberta, as Parks Canada has been as well, and just looking at that as another tool sort of in the toolbox for surveillance. We have had some weak detections in some systems through that eDNA testing, and we're still kind of working through with the university and the lab to understand kind of what that means, and that it could mean that there could be the parasite present in the system, but we don't, that would require more testing to gather more information. And at this point, you know, impacts haven't been observed, and we need to kind of gather more information about what that weak detection could mean. If we move to the next slide. In terms of next steps for this coming year, so I kind of touched on these first bullets a little bit already. So just in terms of, and I know this will be talked about in the next few slides, so I won't go into too much detail, but I just mentioned that in terms of the presence of the parasite versus actually having impacts or effects on the population, still unknown, as there can be a number of variables that can impact how it can vary how that may impact a population from the species and environmental conditions. So in terms of immediate steps for this coming year, we're kind of deep into the planning stage right now in terms of certainly the immediate focus is on increasing outreach and education. So we just did another big print run of the Clean Drain Dry signs, as well as our information brochures that Jess mentioned. So we have lots of outreach materials available for sharing and working with partners to get the information out there. And also continuing to work with our partners on looking at next steps and priorities for surveillance based on results from this past year, in 2024, and just looking at kind of priorities for this coming year. So currently in the planning stages and continuing to work with partners on next steps. And I think the only other piece that I wanted to touch on is just some work that we've been doing over the winter and coming into this spring is we have some very specific proposed amendments that are going forward that are being proposed under the Wildlife Act. And this would be to establish authorities for kind of 3 components. And why I wanted to mention this is because it links through to the pull the plug that I mentioned. So last year it was implemented, I mentioned, through the BC Chief Veterinarian, and that's under the Animal Health Act. We're looking to establish a requirement under the Wildlife Act as a longer term solution. That the current order, which doesn't expire under the Animal Health Act, was kind of done as a temporary measure, but we're looking to build something longer term under the Wildlife Act. And also too, we have existing requirements under the Wildlife Act for the requirement to stop at all watercraft inspection stations that are set up to be checking boats for primarily invasive mussels, but also looking for other aquatic invasive species and aquatic diseases and prevention through clean, drain, dry. So that is just a piece that we are streamlining the sort of where that falls under the Wildlife Act for that requirement. So those first 2 that I mentioned are essentially streamlining existing requirements that are already in place. And the intent is to have those implemented for this coming boating season if the proposed amendments are approved. The third one, they're around mandatory inspection of watercraft entering BC from another jurisdiction prior to launching in BC waters. This is something that will require further analysis in terms of what the implementation would look like. So would be something that would be implemented at a later date. And so with that, I will pass it over to Lori.
Great. Thank you, Martina. Hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Yeah, Lori Frankham with CKIS. So I'm doing the last portion of the presentation and talking to you about what you can do to actually help prevent the spread. It's not all doom and gloom. Yes, it is here, but there are some actions that we can take to ensure that it doesn't spread further than the distribution already mentioned. So we'll go to the next slide there. So why should you care? There are impacts with whirling disease that I'll just quickly go over. So there are some environmental impacts. So whirling disease can cause significant decline in fish populations, especially in our trout and salmon populations. So this collapse can definitely negatively impact aquatic ecosystems, leading to cascading effects throughout the whole food web. In addition, there are some economic impacts. So the disease can threaten livelihoods of those who depend on healthy fish populations, such as commercial fisheries and tourism operators here in BC. And lastly, there are social impacts with whirling disease. So if it does affect our fish populations, the availability and food security for communities that rely on wild fish will be impacted. As well, sport fishing opportunities decline and water bodies may be closed to prevent the spread of the disease, limiting public access and recreation. As we've seen, we've had that happen up in Yoho by Parks Canada. So we'll do the next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So before we get into the actions to take, it is important to know how it does spread. So humans can definitely spread this whirling disease around because the spores cling to equipment used for things that we love to do in water, like fishing and boating and paddling and swimming. As well, it can be spread through infected fish, alive or dead, and their parts. We'll do the next slide. Perfect. So prevention is key. It is definitely, Martina touched on this a little bit, prevention is the best tool in our toolbox to prevent it from spreading to other water bodies. So some simple best practices to remember when you're out enjoying our water bodies this year is you never want to move any fish or fish parts. So handling fish carefully is really, really important. As Martina mentioned, the watercraft inspection stations, it is mandatory. Not stopping can result in a fine. So you'll see the signage on the right-hand side. So not only is this to prevent whirling disease, but other aquatic invasive species like mussels that are also a threat to our aquatic ecosystems. And then lastly, like Martina mentioned, clean, drain, dry, really important part, and pulling the plug. So in the next slide, I'll just unpack that a little bit more and go over the steps. Sorry, I'm working with multiple screens here. Okay, so clean, drain, dry, what does that mean? So the first step is cleaning. So you thoroughly want to inspect your boat, your trailer, equipment, basically anything that's touched the water, and remove any mud, dirt, plants from the area. You really want to pay attention to any hidden or hard to reach areas, gaps, crevices, holes, or any really inconspicuous place where some of these this mud and debris could potentially be hiding. Next is you want to drain anything that holds water. So anything conceivable that you have with you that would hold water, you want to make sure that you are draining that before you leave the area. And then drying. You want to dry all areas of the vessel that may have gotten wet. So drying boats, gear, and equipment, usually, like I say, for a minimum of 24 hours is going to really help minimize the risk of decontamination. And as Martina mentioned, last spring, a new regulation came into place where it is illegal to transport your watercraft with the drain plug still in place. So before transporting your boat, and to avoid a fine, really important to remove the drain plug and ensure that all that water is drained onto dry land. Let's do the next slide. And if you are within the Columbia River watershed, there's another important step to take, and that's decontamination protocol. So this is highly recommended for the public, required for government staff and contractors, and a condition on all permits involving work in and around water. So I'll just go through the steps that involves in the next slide. The first step, similar to clean, drain, dry, is you want to remove all organic material from your watercraft and equipment. Leaving it on can definitely render disinfectant, won't make them as effective. So ensure all surfaces are clean before applying disinfectants. The next one is, disinfecting the equipment itself. So you want to choose a disinfectant. You can use household bleach. You do want to dilute it. And in the protocols that have been developed, there are very good instructions about what ratio to dilute it to. You can also use ammonia. The thing to remember when using these sort of products is you always want to follow the safety guidelines and wear the appropriate personal protection equipment. So then you want to soak or spray. So any item that can be immersed in water, you want to do that for about 10 minutes. So definitely having like some sort of a rigid rubber tote or a similar container with you when you're going out to enjoy the water is a good idea. So let it soak for about 10 minutes. Anything that is too big to submerge, you want to spray or wipe down with a disinfectant, keeping the surface damp for at least 10 minutes. You want to use a pump style sprayer for any larger items like your boat. And just ensure that you're protecting non-waterproof electronics from any sort of exposure. And then after everything has been soaked or sprayed down for 10 minutes, you want to rinse it thoroughly. So you want to rinse all the items with clean water, so not from the water body that you were just in. You're just going to, undo all the great work that you just did. And this is going to help prevent residue buildup. And then lastly, dry. Again, this is the same step as clean, drain, dry. You want to allow items to air dry for a minimum of 24 hours. Just a quick note about the disposal of these disinfectant materials. You want to make sure that you're not putting any of this like bleach or these solutions that you're using directly into the environment, because that could cause some harm as well. So small amounts can be diluted and poured into a sanitary sewer. And again, the decontamination protocol goes into a lot more detail about this. So we'll send you that link and you can read through it. So that's a quick overview of the decontamination. So next slide. So another way that you can help is to be on the lookout for unusual fish behavior or appearance. Things to look out for are deformities of the spine or skull. If they swim in a whirl and movement, you can kind of see that in the little video there, or a blackened tail. These are signs that these fish may have been impacted or infected with whirling disease, and we love to hear reports on it. So if you do see, this behavior or appearance of fish, we'll do the next slide. We do ask that you report this to the government. So you can email whirlingdisease@gov.bc.ca. So definitely report any suspected whirling disease sightings. You can also ask them about outreach materials, or if you have any questions about whirling disease, that's your main contact. As well, if you want to pull up any of the resources mentioned, like that Clean Drain Dry brochure that Jess spoke of earlier, you can also go to the government website on whirling disease. Next slide. The last one, and maybe the most important, is to spread the word. So we need more people to know about this. So when you're out with your fishing buddies or your family enjoying a day at the lake, bring this topic up. Let them know what whirling disease is, what the impacts are, and most importantly, what the steps they can do to prevent it from going into a new water body. And we'll do the next slide. And don't hesitate to contact your friendly regional invasive species society like CSIS or CKIS, or if you're joining us from a different part of the province, reach out to your local organization. As well, the Ministry of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship is a great resource to reach out to on this topic, or anything else related to invasive species. Okay, so that concludes our presentation. If right now we'll open it up to if anyone has any questions.
Thanks, Lori, and thank you to the three of you for that presentation. It was really informative and a great snapshot of what's going on at the moment. There is quite a few questions, so I'll just start at the top and kind of make my way through. Martina, if you want to take a go at them first. Will the presence of whirling disease in BC affect the location or efforts at the highway inspection stations this year? Extended lake closures are potentially going to put pressure on other lakes.
Yeah, so we are planning to have similar operation levels from 2024 for our watercraft inspection stations. So we'll be continuing to operate the permanent stations that we have, our 6 permanent stations and our 2 roving inspection crews. Certainly at those inspection stations, I mean, their immediate focus is on the invasive mussels, but certainly they have our information brochure and they're checking boats to be clean, drain, dry. So they're of course sharing the information about whirling disease, checking boats to make sure they're clean, drain, dry, and have the drain plug removed. Those are actual first stations will be opening here in the next kind of week. We're just in the process of onboarding our first round of inspectors and having several of our southern stations opening here in the next week. And then we'll have additional stations coming online by mid-May for the kind of full boating season. In terms of lake closures, there are no lake closures specific linked to whirling disease that are planned at this time. So I'm not sure if that was the second component of the question, but yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Martina. And this one's kind of related to that in a way, so I'll jump to this one. This is from Jillian. How can we work to create a cleaning station at one of the priority lakes to help with the CDD requirements? Seabird Development Corp acquired a large marina on the east shore of Harrison Lake that presents an opportunity to lead with a proactive cleaning station for incoming watercraft in Harrison. Is this something we could pursue together?
Yeah, and that might be something to kind of connect offline just to get a better sense of kind of the scope of what they mean by kind of cleaning station or checking boats, because we can kind of talk about what that may look like. So perhaps maybe I can connect with you, Jillian, offline.
Awesome, thanks. And this was answered during the presentation, but it never hurts to repeat it out loud just in case. Have any whirling disease infected fish been found in BC, or has whirling disease only been detected at a molecular level?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, there was the 3 trout samples that were taken from the tributaries into the south arm of Kootenay Lake that tested positive for the parasite. And I think just to confirm, in order to confirm the presence of whirling disease and a potential infection, it does require that lab testing at the molecular level. because some of the clinical signs of whirling disease, like the kind of deformed spine, could be caused by other things other than whirling disease. So even if we have fish that are showing clinical signs, we still need to have that kind of molecular lab confirmation to confirm that it is in fact caused by through whirling disease.
Awesome. And I know Lori just mentioned that the outreach brochures and materials can be found on the government website. Allison was asking, how do we order clean, drain, dry, and pull the plug signs? Like, is that something that people could order as well?
Yeah, so we don't have a formal like ordering system online, but if you connect through the whirling disease inbox that Lori shared, and I saw that it was posted in the chat as well. Certainly, if you want requests for either signs or brochures can be sent to that inbox. We do monitor it regularly, and we'll do our best to accommodate requests that come in for sharing of available resources.
Martina, I'm just going to chime in here. Also, you could reach out to your regional invasive species society. Like if the person that's calling is in the Central Kootenays, we also have some resources to give out. So that's another avenue to pursue for some resources.
Yeah, great point.
Awesome. And there's a second part to that question from Allison as well. They're wondering if there will be more inspection stations in the province.
Yeah, I think that may have been touched on in the earlier question. So for this year, we're planning for same kind of level of operations and stations that we had from last year. So our continuing of our 6 permanent stations and our 2 roving inspection crews. And that's targeting boats coming in at the border entry points into the province along the BC-Alberta border, and then the southern Canada-US border.
Awesome. And Jillian has answered this in the chat, but if there's anything else that you wanted to add to this, Lisa's asking what defines a priority boat launch for the new signs. And Jillian sent a website and said that there's 78 lakes in BC that are listed as priority lakes.
I didn't see what was posted in the chat in terms of priority lakes. So for signage, we our immediate focus last year was looking at locations where there isn't already clean, drain, dry signs in place within the Columbia River watershed. So we know there's been a lot of great work by a lot of partners, I'm sure many of which are on the webinar right now. So for installing signs over the years. And so we wanted to focus on not duplicating where there is already existing clean, drain, dry signs and identify where there are gaps. And we kind of immediately focused last year on the Columbia River watershed, but certainly if there's other, known locations in particular, higher use water bodies, locations in your regions where there's a need for signage, again, reaching out through the whirling disease inbox. We don't have an infinite number of signs available, but certainly we'll want to maximize using those that we have currently ordered and knowing where there are priorities and what the need is beyond that for other locations where there isn't signage. So really we want to work with you in terms of what are the regional needs of where there aren't existing signs.
Perfect. This one's from Ben. Is there any plan to regulate the movement of wake boats that have large ballast tanks that may be impossible to monitor or disinfect?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly boats that do have ballast tanks have an elevated risk. So this is something that we have specific through the invasive mussel defense program and our decontamination protocol for invasive mussels is that we do have decontamination protocols to decontaminate those ballast tanks. And what makes them particular high risk is that there's a certain amount of water at the bottom of those tanks that can't get pumped out through the pumping system. So that's essentially water that can't be verified or checked for just doing a visual inspection. So if the boat's deemed to be high risk, then we will take the steps to decontaminate those ballast tanks at the inspection stations. So we have those protocols in place as part of the for the invasive mussel decontamination.
Awesome. This one's from Cheyenne. If we encounter a fish with whirling disease symptoms, should we leave it in the lake or remove it, assuming we have correct licenses to do so?
Yeah, great question. And so we would ask that you don't remove it because if it is potentially infected, we don't want to have movement of infected fish. So we just ask that you leave it, take a photo, video, submit it through that whirling disease inbox, and then we can do the necessary follow-up to look into it.
Awesome. And this is also kind of connected to that one in a way from Dave. How can local clubs assist in sampling and or monitoring to help map areas that may be higher risk? Things like water temperature graphs, pH sampling, etc.
Yeah, I think in terms of, maybe it's something that we could connect offline just to get a better understanding of potential groups, kind of what kind of resources and capacity they have in terms of types of monitoring they could do. Certainly, we know there's lots of different groups that are interested to become involved, and that's part of the work that we're kind of trying to plan for this year is where are the priorities for surveillance and what types of information do we need collected, and that could vary kind of depending on the area and the level of priorities. So, you know, kind of connecting with different partners in different groups to see what their capacity is and finding kind of what might be the best information that may be needed to be collected depending on kind of the sort of scaling area that we're looking at. So
Awesome. Yeah, that would be great to connect offline with those groups. Okay, this is another one from Dave. Is there any plan being developed to stop the downstream migration on brook trout from Emerald Lake, which are likely carriers of whirling disease TAMs, or to hold Parks Canada accountable for allowing the spread of whirling disease as well as invasive brook trout, but instead just closing access to waters?
I'll do my best to answer if I understand the question correctly. So one of the challenges with whirling disease is that there is no treatment option available. And so depending on the system and what's feasible, even in terms of containment, certainly prevention in terms of preventing kind of movement of fish, that being, you know, in terms of through activities and those types of things. So you know, Parks Canada did implement those closures within those two parks following those detections. And it can depend too on at what stage, you know, the detection's been found in terms of if it's been present for several years, really trying to prevent that downstream spread can be challenging. And so they've certainly been active in terms of doing monitoring and surveillance and, you know, implementing some of those actions to try to help prevent further spread through activities and movement.
Thanks, Martina. Is there any potential career paths that could help with this disease that you know?
Oh, great question. I mean, I think certainly a lot of the kind of work that was described from Laurie in terms of the outreach and education. So, you know, wherever there's pathways to be involved in outreach and education in terms of sharing the messaging around helping to prevent the spread is really great. I mean, I saw Jillian posted we do have, of course, through the work of the invasive mussel defense program, which is, you know, sharing the messaging around invasive mussels, aquatic invasive species, and aquatic diseases like whirling disease. You know, that is an opportunity to be involved through those. We've just brought on our inspectors for this season, but we certainly do go through that hiring process annually. But yeah, different kind of wherever there's kind of different platforms to be working on outreach and education is certainly I would say a main area.
And I think if you're interested in those careers, this is the perfect time to start looking for that, because I know a lot of organizations are hiring their field teams and outreach teams for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point.
I think Lori might have answered this during the decontamination section that she was talking about, but Decker's asking what happens if you clean a boat and the water drains into a storm drain?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do really want to strongly encourage as much as possible to take those clean, drain, dry steps in an area that's away from any kind of storm drains or natural waterways. So ideally, if it can be done sort of in a kind of gravel parking lot or an area that's away from where water could flow into storm drains or kind of natural waterways, that is ideal. So ideally, we do want to try to kind of prevent that from happening. So if you're able to kind of do that away from those kind of water systems, that's definitely best.
Awesome. And this might have been during another question, but it might not. Lisa's asking, how will the new decontamination protocols be enforced?
So the decontamination protocol for whirling disease, in terms of its requirement, what we had in place last year, and we're still and planned so far for this year, is that it was required for government staff and contractors. So something that we are implementing as part of permitting requirements. So that's something that we're obviously trying to build the awareness of that requirement at this point, given that it's something that's really new. So at this point, we're really trying to, I would say, focus on building the awareness of that and just integrating that in with those permitting requirements.
Awesome. And then Shona's asking, I noticed that there were some very limited sampling done outside of the Columbia watershed in 2024. Are there any plans to sample any more areas within the Fraser watershed in 2025?
Yeah, great question. And we're still in those planning stages in terms of what the areas of focus will be for this coming year. We were certainly primarily focused within the Columbia River watershed, and what sampling we did out there was more limited to where there was kind of opportunistic sampling through other programs. So that's kind of the planning stage that we're in right now in terms of looking at areas for priority for monitoring this coming year.
Awesome, thanks. And then we just have one more question here. And I think Jess answered this at the beginning, but did whirling disease originate in Europe or was it somewhere else?
Yeah, so the parasite itself originates in Europe. That's correct.
Awesome, thanks for confirming that. We have no more questions in the queue at the moment. I don't know if I missed anything else. Yeah, we'll maybe leave it for a second in case anyone has any questions or follow-up comments that they wanted to add to any of those answers. And if there's nothing else, then we can give everyone an extra 5 minutes into their day. And not seeing anything pop up, but if anyone would like to connect with Martina or Jess or Lori afterwards to discuss anything in your region, any questions that you want to have or how you could potentially get involved with helping the prevention of whirling disease, their contact information is all in the chat and we'll be sending it out in a follow-up email as well. So yeah, any questions, just reach out to any of us and we'll do our best to help you out. Thank you so much, Jess, Lori, and Martina. It was super informative, really great presentation, and really appreciate you joining us to spread awareness today.
Thank you. Thanks, BCFDF, for organizing the behind the scenes with registration and follow up. So appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Happy boating season, everyone.
Take care.
Happy boating season.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.